Hi, and welcome to Apes and Pants with me, Sean Coffey and Chris Brennan. Thanks for joining us today as we explore the whys and wherefores of human behavior. For more information on this episode and to learn about what we do, visit us at adultacademy.org/apes and pants. Chris, what are we doing today?
Sean, last week we talked about mutual aid and coming together to achieve a common purpose. Today we're going to focus on what happens when we have to go it alone. We're going to try and answer that question: how can we become self-reliant? Stick with us.
It is now time for Apes in Pants.
So it seems a ditching teenage fantasy means ditching all your dreams. All your friends and peers and family solemnly tell you you will have to grow up, be an adult, yeah, be bored and unfulfilled. Oh, but no one's yet explained to me exactly what's so great about saving 50 years away on something that you hate. About meekly shuffling down the path of mediocrity. Well, if that's your road, then take it, but it's not the road for me.
Apes and
Won't
Pants.
sit down and won't shut up. And most of all, I will not grow up.
What is self-reliance?
All right, so the dictionary says, quote, the reliance on one's own powers and resources rather than those of others, end quote. It's doing things for yourself. On a pretty everyday level, we could say that making dinner for ourselves is a self-reliant act if we were to contrast it with going out to eat someplace or having somebody else cook for us, right? I sum it up this way, and once again, this episode, we're going to earn the explicit tag on iTunes. Buyer beware. Self-reliance is being able to say anywhere and at any time, fuck it, I got it.
What have you got?
Anything. Whatever life throws your way, right? At the end of the day, that's the idea behind the fuck it, I've got it, or what I like to call the Fiji mantra, F-I-G-I. I recognize that the island is spelled differently. So before the comment section blows up, there's 7 of you that watch these. So if the 7 of you want to comment on my spelling, go for it. But anyway, but that idea, that Fiji mantra is this idea that whatever life throws your way, that you have the confidence and the determination to figure it out. You're going to find a solution. You're going to find your way through.
So how do you practice that? Because as simple as it is, and oftentimes we get down some rabbit holes on these things, this has to be much, much more involved on some levels than just doing it each day.
So I think that the starting point has to be setting in your mind the idea that you are not going to be defeated, that you are not going to let the vagaries and the problems of life stop you. Not that you're not going to have difficulty. You're going to have difficulty. So we're recording this October 24th. You guys will see it in a couple of weeks. Yesterday was the 8th anniversary of my wife's surgery to remove her 3rd occurrence of a skull-based tumor. When we got that diagnosis, and it was the first time that I had gone through that with her, that rocks you to your core. And at the same time, you have 1,000 different ways. Everybody's going to react to things differently. But for me, the only way to react to it was to say, we're not going to be defeated by this. We're going to give this everything that we've got. And the day of her surgery, I sat in the waiting room for 11 or 12 hours, however long that was. And was wearing a shirt with William Henley's Invictus poem on it. And the Invictus poem is this: out of the night that covers me, black as the pit from pole to pole, I thank whatever gods may be for my unconquerable soul. In the fell clutch of circumstance, I have not winced nor cried aloud. Under the bludgeonings of chance, my head is bloody but unbowed. Beyond this place of wrath and tears looms but the horror of the shade, and yet the menace of the years finds and shall find me unafraid. It matters not how straight the gate, how charged with punishments the scroll. I am the master of my fate. I am the captain of my soul. Henley wrote that poem in 1875, and this was a dude who, at 19, lost a leg, and laying in a hospital bed, set his course that this disability, this, especially at the time, this horribly disabling injury was not going to defeat him. And the expression that was printed across the back of the shoulders of the shirt was bloody but unbowed. And I think that that's part of that fuck it, I got it mantra, is recognizing that you're going to get bloodied. You're going to get knocked around. Life is going to deal you trouble and difficulty. It's not going to be easy. But that the I've got it part is the recognition that if you take a deep breath and begin chipping away one thing at a time at your problem, you can find a solution.
So the bloodied and yet unbowed. I feel like we have said this a handful of times. I think both of us have a more than general disdain for this phrase, that whole man up.
Yeah, I can't stand that phrase. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but it kind of comes down to that, isn't it? Isn't it different wording at this point? Regardless of applying a gender, I guess, because
Sure,
a woman sure as hell could woman up. They're
Right.
tougher than we are. But how does that turn into something bigger for mundane, the everyday, and then how is that expanded upon when you are faced with something life-threatening and certainly something like your wife went through? Because I think of myself, I'm always getting riled up about the little things. The big things I handle, no problem. For whatever reason, something comes over me, I'm immediately calm. Fuck it, I got it. I drop a glass out of the dishwasher. I'm in the corner sucking my thumb, crying in the dark because I don't know how to handle it.
You know, I think it's a couple of things, and I think that part of it is, for most of us, when the stakes get high, a lot of the fluff anxiety melts away because we're dealing with an actual high stakes situation. And that if we have learned over the years any level of true self-reliance, if we've been put in situations where we have to be self-reliant, then I think that those high stakes situations bring out our abilities. I think that in the everyday mundane, when, dropping the glass, whatever, the grocery store not having the kind of minced garlic that you buy, whatever it may be, those little things that infuriate us. I think that what it is that they are little things, so they can get to us. The paper cut probably elicits much more screaming and gnashing of teeth out of the self-reliant person than the pretty good cut. The times that I've sliced my hand open doing something in construction, I tend to look at it and go, well, you big dummy, and then start handling the problem. Conversely, I get a little paper cut and I'm, oh my God, I'm losing my mind. So maybe that's part of it. I think we're human. We got to react to something. And I think that on balance, if you gotta overreact to something, it's probably better to overreact
To a paper cut?
to the paper cut than to be paralyzed by the high stakes situation. And maybe that's what we're getting at, is not necessarily this sort of level of unperturbed stoicism, sort of so this is how it relates back to your idea of, I think, why we both hate that expression of man up. That expression contains with it the tone that you should not be affected by what's going on. Like the idea that you shouldn't have any emotion about what's going on. It's perfectly reasonable to be upset. It's perfectly reasonable to be affected. It's perfectly reasonable to be sad, to be stressed out, to be frustrated, to acknowledge your fear. I think that what comes out oftentimes in that man up expression is it's okay for you to be angry about the situation. It's not okay for you to admit that you're afraid. And here's the thing that I think we come back to. Acknowledging your fear is not the same thing as being paralyzed by your fear. And I think if you acknowledge your fear, it's a much healthier place. It allows you to not get to that place where you're just angry about it. You're dealing with the problem. You acknowledge the underlying emotional state of it, but you're not. That doesn't have to result in being paralyzed. And I think that that's the big thing. Like, that's the big thing with self-reliance. It's not being paralyzed by the scary stuff. It's not being brought to a halt that you can't function when you're confronted with a situation where you do have to go it alone.
Why does self-reliance matter?
So I think if we're going to set out and achieve goals, if we're going to set out to have things that we want to achieve in life, if we're going to express our agency, we need to be prepared to do that at times, even when we're going it alone. We're not always going to have the support of others. That can be a relatively sort of mundane, innocuous sort of thing, right? Nobody else in your family wants to watch the movie that you want to go see, so you go on your own, or the teacher that you have isn't going to cover some aspect of history or science that you want to learn about, so you say, well, I'm just gonna go learn about this on my own. Those are all examples of times when you have to go on your own to achieve a goal that you have. But it can also be much more high stakes, right? You fall off a boat. You go for a hike and get lost in the woods. You get separated from the group that you're with. You're doing some type of, my favorite example, because it happens to me on a pretty regular basis, you're doing some type of building project or creating something and you hurt yourself. There's not always going to be somebody there to swoop in and solve the problem or to help you solve the problem. You may need to start making steps on your own.
So aside from the fact that there's a spectrum of self-reliance here that we're talking about, because they do go from the mundane to, falling off a boat. I suppose, I don't know. I'm sitting here and I'm trying to think of examples from my life that I'm trying to almost re-walk and retrace some steps, problems that I may have had. And I just keep coming back to the little things versus the big things. And there have been so many little ones. I don't know if it would be, one of those, a moment of clarity. A few years ago, to this day, I don't remember why I was upset. It was something really tiny. And I And I almost, I not even almost, I had it in my head. I thought, oh, I'm going to get mad about this. And I'm going to carry on and I'm going to do this and my next step. And I can see myself doing this. Oh, yeah, I'm going to do that. And as I'm doing this in my head, I'm thinking, why? What in the hell are you doing? And I stopped and I just said, you know what? I'm not going to have a bad day. I'm not doing this. I don't know. It just, I immediately shut it off.
Mm-hmm.
And that was it. I didn't let it get and be anything bigger than what it was. You know, emotionally, it was a paper cut.
Yeah.
It was small, it was sharp, but it was also over with just as quickly.
Right.
And I have, in the past, just let myself go, just ruin anything and everything I could. I suppose it goes back to the original question I had at the beginning was, how do we practice this? And we know why it matters, because it's not going to let us get off our path. It's going to help us achieve goals. But how do we continue to practice this? And without that, other than that specific example.
Sure. So I think there's sort of, the longer I do these, the more I realize how much equivocation I put into my statements here. But I think that's because there is more than one way to look at these problems, and there's certainly more than one facet to a problem. I saw a great thing on Twitter yesterday about the problem with people who want to find simple solutions to complex problems is that they often ignore massive swaths of what has gone into laying the groundwork for this problem. And I think that that's one of the things that we run into in doing this is that, but because what we're talking about is human behavior, the desire is to distill it down to, these little bite-sized nuggets of, 30 words or less. Here, do this and your problem is solved. But that's not reality. That's not how these things happen. So there is a lot of well this or well but sort of conversation that has to happen. And I say that because I think that we're sort of dealing with, in your example, we're dealing with maybe a misunderstanding about self-reliance. At no point in time in any of these situations have you expressed, I didn't have the tools to handle it. I didn't know how to solve the problem. Solving the problem is the example of self-reliance. It's perfectly acceptable to get frustrated. It's perfectly acceptable to get angry. Being upset about the situation, being flustered, is not an example of not being self-reliant. It's an example of being human. What happens is the self-reliance piece is what you do after you're done being flustered, so to speak. Where the difference between self-reliance and waiting for somebody else to solve the problem for you is what comes into play, right? If you're working on solving your problem to the extent that you can do it, you're engaged in a self-reliant manner. Now, if what we're looking for in that self-reliance is also sort of that stoicism that we hear in Henley's poem, or the sort of stoicism and autonomy that you hear in Ralph Waldo Emerson's Self-Reliance essay, I think it's important to remember that as much as Emerson is known as this great recluse who went off into the woods to think and to write and to live on his own and to compose these works on self-reliant living and independence and whatnot, his mom and his sister brought him muffins every weekend. Like, the idea behind self-reliance is not a strict autonomy, right? We are social creatures. We perform our best in social situations. And in the same way, when The social dynamic is where we feel like there's a problem. That's where we get the most amped up, right? When I'm not getting that sort of, when I'm not getting the empathy, when I'm not getting the mutual aid out of somebody else, that's where I get my back up about a situation. So I think we can look at how these sort of tie together with those other ideas. And it's this. Being self-reliant is about not stopping. It's about not being frozen in such a way that you can't move forward with your goals and objectives, even if nobody else is there with you. Because there's a time in our, whether it's standing up to the bully in school, or again, some of the examples about, I want to learn how to do X and nobody is going to teach me. Well, the self-reliant act is to go and teach yourself. So how do we practice self-reliance? I think we set it in our minds first and foremost that we get to choose. If there is something that we want to learn, if there is something that we want to do, we get to choose whether we're going to pursue that, even if we do not have the support of other people. So let's take a really grand example, right? Elon Musk going out and starting SpaceX. He didn't do that without other people involved. And yet, the act of self-reliance in sticking with something, despite failures and the disbelief of others when you're the driving force, that was an act of self-reliance. It was an act of believing in the things that he had put in place, right? I am not going to stop. I think the same thing happens with sitting down and writing a book. Okay, I've sat down and written several. The only thing that gets you to the end of the book is an act of self-reliance, because through that process, you're on your own. There are hours and hours and hours where nobody else is with you, or nobody else is guiding you and supporting you, or providing you feedback, or providing you support. Those are sort of long-term examples of self-reliance. But again, self-reliance is also just I know 40-year-olds that get upset because mom didn't make them dinner. That's not self-reliance. That's dependency. And that's the thing. So maybe that's it. The opposite of self-reliance, the antithesis of self-reliance, is dependency. The analog of self-reliance is not autonomy.
How do we become self-reliant?
I think the first thing we do is to set it in our minds that we are going to do things for ourselves. We are going to identify things that we have traditionally looked to somebody else to do, and we're going to start doing them ourselves. Change the oil in your own car. Teach yourself how to sew the hem in a pair of pants. Pick a skill that you don't know how to do and teach yourself how to do it. Because at the end of the day, self-reliance is about knowing that not only you have skills, but that you have the skill of figuring out how to solve problems. And learning how to teach yourself to work through problems, I think, is the first place. You find resources, right? Find books, find YouTube videos. If you need to, go out and find a teacher. Because I think that finding a teacher for something that is not, that you're choosing, that your normal circle isn't providing, is still a self-reliant act, right? But the key is to pick something and start. Sit down, pick a thing, and start teaching yourself.
Does it have to be learning a skill?
I think it's probably the best place to start.
Why?
Because at the end of the day, if you're really going to embrace that Fiji mantra, you have to have the knowledge, skills, and abilities to tackle problems that come up. And the thing about learning knowledge, learning about the world around you, coming to understand things about the universe, is that rarely is that type of knowledge acquisition going to solve a practical real world problem, right? If I need to eat, then I need to learn how to chop onions and saute food, right? I need to learn how to cook if I want to be able to feed myself day in, day out. I can read all the books I want about the physiology of taste, but if I don't know how to pick up a knife and an onion and start dicing, if I don't know how to go to the grocery store and shop, this is all a mental exercise. At the end of the day, self-reliance is about getting things done. And the other thing with skills is that you can break skills down into very small chunks. So you can begin learning and seeing success in your learning quickly. I want to understand how X works. Whatever your X is, the second you put the word "I want to understand it," you very realistically have something that could be a doctoral dissertation, depending upon how deep into the woods you want to get with what your understanding means. I want to tie my shoes is a pretty concrete skill. I want to be able to make Thai garlic beef. Okay, well, download a recipe, read the recipe. What are the skills that are involved in the recipe? Well, maybe I need to do some dicing. Maybe I need to learn how to do some seasoning. Maybe I need to learn how to measure. Those are each individual little skill sets that you can break out. And as you're learning them, you can go, I now have that skill. I now have that skill. I now have that skill. And those successes breed successes, right? We fill ourselves with these skills. And now, well, I learned how to dice onions because I wanted to make Thai garlic beef for dinner. Now I know how to dice onions. I can dice onions for some other dinner. So skills can be applied across they can be applied across other goals that we might have. And that's why I think skills are important. Then they're so measurable, right? There's a concrete end of the day, I got the onion diced or I didn't. And then I can start refining the quality of how I diced my onion if I want to improve on the end state. But I can see whether or not I got it done. I can see whether or not I got my shoes tied. I can see whether or not I built a bookcase for myself.
So how do those confidences and those skills, how do those skills go from confidences, and then what's after the confidence part?
I don't know that there's anything after the confidence part. I think that the difference between fuck it, I got it, and the next step is the decision about craft or artistry. You know? So let's take the bookcase example, all right? Let's say that I want a bookcase. The Fiji mantra method would be to say, okay, what does a bookcase look like? Let me put a bookcase together. And at the end of the day, if what you've done is cut a bunch of boards and nailed them together, if they hold books, you have a bookcase. You have succeeded in the basic level of achieving your objective. Well, now the next step is, how far do I want to go with this as a craft? You know, I mean, heck, let's jump it back even further. I want to build a bookcase. You went out and got cinder blocks and 2x12s and stacked them up. Will it hold books? Oh, yeah. I have a bookcase. I've built a bookcase. That's different than me now having the depth of understanding of craft and design and technique to necessarily be making high quality furniture that other people want to buy. And that's the difference between the confidence of, I can get this done for myself. I can assure that this thing that I want accomplished is accomplished, and becoming an expert. And that probably is the next step beyond competence. Like, beyond the basic confidence that I could fix this, I can handle this, I can find a solution to this, the next step is expertise. And it's the difference between a little bit of effort and a lifetime worth of effort.
So quickly, tie together the 4 values we've talked about so far: empathy, agency, mutual aid, and self-reliance. Get them all together in one big ball.
All right. So I think that at the end of the day, what we're looking at is this idea of how to function in a whole and healthy way in the world. And all 4 of these values tie together in that what they are trying to find is balance. They are trying to help us identify qualities that will help us find balance in the world. Empathy is us getting outside of our fear-based primate mind and trying to identify with others and see things from a perspective other than our own. Agency is held in tension with that. It is not giving all of ourselves up, but rather saying, even though I am trying to view things from your viewpoint, I am trying to see things from your world, I also have aims and objectives that I want to obtain. How can I do that in an empathetic way? Can I do that in an empathetic way? And if I can't, making that a conscious choice. There may be aims that I have that are going to be, that would take away from you. I have to make a decision about whether or not I'm okay with that. And I think that one of the things that we're talking about is doing that consciously, not unconsciously. So then that ties into this, the mutual aid and self-reliance concepts then tie together, right? We live in, we are a social species. We live in an environment in which we do rely on the mutual aid and the effort of one another to achieve things and accomplish things and move forward as a society. And yet, there are going to be times when I can't rely on somebody else to be there. And if I want to go about achieving my agenic aims, I need to be able to exert my self-reliance and keep moving forward. If I want to be agenic and be self-reliant, I still need to be engaging with the world empathetically, or I'm walking all over people. I still need to acknowledge the fact that no matter how autonomous I think I am, unless I'm the dude, the primal technology dude on YouTube that is literally going in and starting from day one of humans building stuff with making his own flint-napped axes and stuff like that, we're ignoring his video gear for the time being. Just the actual stuff that the content he's producing, not the way he's producing it. We have to recognize that we're relying on the efforts of others, both the efforts of both the labor of others, right? The things that we're purchasing from them or obtaining from them, but also just their general effort in society. We're still relying on people to open the door for us if we've got an armful of groceries. The idea is that all of these things start to come together in a way where we see ourselves as, we see our agency as important, and I see your agency as important. I see that I need to help you out. I want you to help me out, but at the same time, we both recognize there are still going to be days that we got to just put our head down and get it done on our own because there isn't anybody else there. And the whole way through, we are trying to engage others in a way that makes them feel understood, appreciated, valued as a human being, because those are things that we need and want ourselves.
Yeah, I was just waiting for you to. I didn't know if I was going to give you a signal to wrap it up. Or...
Yeah, I mean, I think that's it.
Yeah, I thought it. I like this idea of the balance in the middle. This, and how these things are going to kind of circle around and play off of one another. And I don't know. One of these days, I need to sit down and organize all the rest of these thoughts that I have, because there's so much in here.
Yeah, and we're going to keep working through it.
Yep. All right. We want to extend a big thanks to singer-songwriter and all-around awesome dude Frank Turner for the use of his song Photosynthesis as our theme song. Please visit frank-turner.com to check out Frank and his work. Follow the links in the show notes to buy his songs on iTunes or Amazon. And as always, if you purchase through Amazon, you also support this show.
Please subscribe to the podcast, sign up for our email list to get notifications of all our new content, and share what we are doing here with your friends. You can visit us at adultacademy.org to find our content, buy a shirt from our Teespring store, and support us using our Amazon link. As always, there's no more valuable resource any of us have than our time. Thanks for spending some of your time with us today. Cheers.